Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Today's the first time our book review is the #1 bestseller, so that's good, I'm sure. Anyway, the book is Eat, Pray, Love. Our reviewer is John Harden. He teaches at, if you read our little flyer, St. Rose and Schenectady County Community College. He just was telling me he's going to be this fall over at Siena. He also is a lawyer. He's working on his PhD. He's raising 2 kids. He's taking care of his parents. I think they live with you, right?
Pardon me?
His parents live with him. He's taking
Yes,
care of his
they live
parents. So he's really a busy guy. So I really want to thank him for taking time out to do this. But then he was telling me everything's so crazy that reading this book was a break almost. So anyway, so here's John Harden to tell us about the book, Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert.
All right.
Oop.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here, like Joe said. It's when you have a lot of things going on, having a certain topic or a certain thing to focus on is a blessing. And so I could say, not now, I've got to read this book, I've got to do this book review coming up. So it was an absolute blessing to be able to be here to do this. I do have a tendency to walk around, and I rarely stay stationary for long. So.
Or just make sure the camera guys know. So
Okay, I promise.
As long as
I
they
won't
know
move that fast. But I want to tell you a little bit about why the book was kind of chosen and suggested, and kind of how this came about. When Joe initially contacted me and asked me if I'd be interested in doing a book review, I said I'd be happy to. And we began kind of searching for a book that would be appropriate for a book review here, that would be fun, but also have some serious components to it, and something that had some kind of religious overtone or spiritual overtones that perhaps I could tap into and use some of kind of my academic background in addition to addressing some of the subjects. And so I said, to Joe, I said, well, I found this book, and when I wrote him the email, I knew that the title of the book was Eat, Pray, Love. But when I typed him out the email, I wrote, Eat, Work, and Pray. Right? And so Joe writes me, emails me back and says, are you talking about Eat, Pray, and Love? And I said, yeah. And of course I said, what a Freudian slip, you know. I said, eat, work, and pray, that's my life, you know, not Elizabeth Gilbert's. So, but anyway, we are here to talk about the book, and I hope to kind of raise some questions. Hopefully that will be something that you can take away with you. For those who have read the book or not read the book, but who might be reading the book in the future, to keep in mind. Basically, my format for today is to really kind of talk a little bit about the book, a little bit about the structure of the book and who the author is, then to kind of talk about what's the worldview of the author, and what can we kind of glean of the worldview kind of reading this book, then to really talk about some of the stuff that I like that I read in the book, and then to talk about some stuff that I didn't like that I read in the book. And then to kind of look to the future. Because one of the first things that I really want to bring up here is the fact that, you know, who the author is. I mean, this is a young woman. She is in her mid-30s. This is not her first book. This is actually, I think, her 4th. And this is her journey, you know, a journey of a woman in her mid-30s. And I think it's important to bear that in mind, because I think when we get to kind of the end of the half hour or so, we can think about what this book would look like from the vantage point of a woman who's in her 50s, looking back at her experiences in her mid-30s. I think that's and we can do that. We can juggle the time frame, and I think that's a relevant question to ask, because reading the book, this young woman has the rest of her life ahead of her, and so we just wonder what kind of journeys she will find herself in during that, during her, forthcoming, and I'm sure to be a very long life. So that's one of the first things that I want to talk about with her. Elizabeth Gilbert does come from a writing family. She is not the only person in her family who has authored works. And obviously, you can glean from just simply the title and perhaps what you've read in some blurbs about the book, this is a very intimate portrait. She really does write about herself, she constantly kind of processes you through her own thoughts, through her own feelings, and through her own experiences. I mean, this is really an intimate work. You know, she's very good about kind of capturing what goes on in her mind and putting it on the paper. And I think, you know, in very kind of stark language many times. And I think some of the scenes that she really brings out for us are very, very vivid. I don't think you can read this book and not be aware of the kind of the painful drama that she opens the book with. You know, particularly in my mind, one of the most vivid scenes, I think, is, you know, the bathroom floor scenes, where she is in the bathroom, kind of at the worst of her depression, kind of struggling to decide whether she wants to live or not. And I think the visceral nature of her description of herself at that point give it a sense of reality and a clarity. You know, you can almost feel the cold ceramic tile underneath her, all right, as she describes this. And it's heartbreaking. I mean, at the same time, it's a very, you know, you have to really kind of feel a great sense of empathy with her. And I just think that's, you know, an interesting, very, very vivid scene that someone who's reading this really couldn't get away with without kind of having that scene lodged somewhere in their minds. Obviously, she's a divorced woman, and part of her journey, the beginning part of her journey, has much to do with her marriage, her subsequent breakup, and then her kind of going out again and having another relationship, and then that relationship breaking up. We said she's a successful writer already. So, and again, we have to look at, I think, one of the questions that I want to raise in regards to this book is kind of looking at who she is, because I think we have to very much keep in mind that this is someone who's not economically challenged. All right? In other words, she is an upper middle class woman, all right, who obviously comes from a background, a family background, which there is, you know, the needs are certainly taken care of. That she's a searching woman. You know, she really defines herself as being on a journey. Now, much of her struggle, I think, in this entire book is about her finding God. You know, she wants to find not just she wants to find a concept of God that works for her and that is appropriate for her, and that is not somehow tied to her childhood. And what is fascinating to me, that in and of itself is not necessarily such, you know, I think at some point in your life, most people have to kind of grapple with that issue. But what really makes it interesting to me is that somehow her struggle to find God is inexorably linked with her sense of finding herself. And I mean the self with the capital S. All right? With this greater sense of who she is tied up with you know, her search for God. So I find that to be rather interesting, that they're so closely linked. All right, that there is something in this young woman's background that gives her, in a sense, this spiritual or this religious longing. All right, that she comes into the book already having. It's already in place. Now, she doesn't know what it is, but she has the inclination. You know, it's there, it's present. As the book opens, you know, we're really taken down into her darkness. The place of the bathroom floor where I'm crying. The kind of struggling with just the basic things of life. All right? Even beyond any sense of being happy or being fulfilled or whatever, it's just about her managing to get through the days. The kind of the end of her marriage, kind of getting that over with. And it is interesting to me, and I think to some extent a little bit too good to be true, the ending of the book. All right, it's a little too fairy tale-like in my mind. That here we come, she opens the book and she's on the bathroom floor and she can't decide whether she's going to commit suicide, and so on and so forth. And then at the end of the book, it's, the world is here, the handsome Brazilian's in love with her, she's been all over the world, she's found God, she's found her mate, she's found, peace. My goodness, it doesn't get much better than that, right? And so I think there is some of that that's present in the book. Now she says, in kind of reading a little bit about her and some background in the book, she really does kind of, she says this is not a universal prescription for happiness, but, you do get that. It's very fairy tale-like in many regards. And it is interesting to me that this book really deals with three topics that Americans in particular, I think, have difficulty with, or that are challenging topics. The first one is food. If we go out and look on the shelves, there are probably a good portion of the collection here are either cookbooks or diet books. Okay, so, this is an issue that matters a great deal and that Americans have a great deal of difficulty dealing with. So I find that interesting. So the first kind of topic that she wants to bring us into is this idea of food and what food symbolizes for her and where she finds that. The second kind of major topic that I think Americans have trouble dealing with is the concept of God. Right? If there is any subject that is as contentious in our society, it's the question of religion. Right? Who's God? What does God look like? Is God a person? All kinds of questions. The politics of God. The relationships that we form around, believing in God or not. How you raise your children. Where your sense of ethics comes from. I mean, these are all tied in with these issues around the nature of God. And so this is obviously a major, major theme that she chooses to deal with. And then the third topic that she really, that I think Americans have so much difficulty with, and the third major topic in the book, is really the topic of others. I am not alone. And of course, in Gilbert's kind of life, this kind of takes the form of relationship, partnership, in particular, a romantic partnership. So it is important, and of course, again, let's go out to the shelves and just see how many self-help books there are about relationships, right? So by the time that we take all the books about food, dieting, and exercise out, then we take all the books out about God, then we take all the books out about others, community/relationships. There's not a whole lot of books left in this building, okay? So she hits big, big topics here, and big, big subjects that seem to be very relevant, not just for her, but these are cultural issues for us. These are cultural issues. All right, so I want to start looking towards finding a worldview here and see where we kind of begin with a worldview and where we end with it. What's a worldview? A worldview is simply how you look at the world around you, how we perceive it. Coming from your background, going to a certain place, it is about how you relate to the external world. And how do I know about the external world? I mean, some of these are the kind of the perennial questions of philosophy. How do I know what I know about the world? All right. So that's kind of what some of the beginning things I want to ask of Gilbert in this book. And one way in which we can ascertain her worldview, and is of particular interest to me because of my background in religious studies, is to look at her search for religious symbols and their meaning. Now, you can't get very far in this book without hitting up on spiritual ideas. I mean, it's right there, right down to the fact that there are 108 kind of chapters. I use that loosely in the book, which of course correlates with the mala, that's used, that is a prayer counter similar to like a rosary, all right, to count prayers. So she's got a spiritual structure to the book. And so she's very, very interested in questions of religious symbolism and meaning. And I think if we had to put, if I had to say, someone said to me, what's the prevalent theme in this book? It's about the search for God in the context of finding the larger self. All right, and I mean self, not just the self as my personality, but the self in terms of who I am as a person. Okay, the larger self. And I took a very interesting quote because she kind of, after the book was published, on her website, and you can go to it, I found it very fascinating. I love examining people's websites because I think they tell you a lot about the person. And even if they weren't directly involved, they do have some input. You can tell because there's a lot of quotations from her. And certainly the frequently asked questions portion always tells me something about what people want to know about the story and kind of where their questions are congregating and what issues. And so she says she comes away with a belief in what she calls the physics of the quest. And I just want to read this. I've come to a belief that there exists in the universe something I call the physics of the quest, a force of nature governed by laws as real as the laws of gravity or momentum. And the rule of quest physics maybe goes like this. If you are brave enough to leave behind everything familiar and comforting, which can be anything from your house to your bitter old resentments, and you set out on a truth-seeking journey, either externally or internally, and if you are truly willing to regard everything that happens to you on the journey as a clue, and if you accept everyone you meet along the way as a teacher, and if you are prepared, most of all, to face and forgive some very difficult realities about yourself, then the truth will not be withheld from you. And that's off of her website. And I find that fascinating. Now, in my mind, this really correlates to, it's a very Joseph Campbell, Power of Myth. Does anybody remember that with Bill Moyers? It's very about the hero's journey. It's about the journey that's undertaken, and the person is transformed in the process. All right. And that's kind of what this speaks to me of. I mean, this really kind of resonates with this. I think this also comes to, this underlying belief that is developing in this young woman's life that somehow everything's going to work out. Again, I have to preface this always by saying it's much more comforting to me if she was 65 and she was telling me that, okay, than she's 35, okay? Now, why do I say that? Because I have 5 nephews, and all of them are in their 20s. And they are all convinced that they are immortal, that they are omnipotent, okay? And that it really doesn't matter because it's going to be okay, all right? And there's some kind of mystical safety net out there that's going to catch them, no matter how reckless they really are. So there's part of me that kind of concerns that. And the other thing that I have to, I reflect back on is I remember going to see the movie Star Wars when the original movie Star Wars came out. And I think I was probably a few years older than the character of Luke Skywalker when I went to see that movie with my father. So I go to see this movie, and I am so impressed with Luke. All right, I walk out of that movie, and I'm thinking, man, he's great. He's action-oriented. He just kind of does it. He doesn't have to analyze it. Isn't this wonderful? Jump 20 years ahead. I'm taking my son to see this movie for the first time, and I walk out of that movie theater, and I'm thinking, Luke is such a jerk. All right? He runs off. He doesn't think it through. He's, right? The movie hasn't changed, but I have. All right? My perspective's changed. So my thing is that I would feel a little bit more comfortable with the physics of the quest if she was a lot older and had a lot more experiences under her belt. That's not to diminish who she is. She certainly has a lot to say and a lot to offer, but you need to keep the perspective in mind. So, what else about a worldview here can we say? The next thing I want to introduce is kind of the psychological nature of the book. And this is kind of when thinking about how to kind of mentally frame this for myself, I was thinking, I called this psychoanalysis at a distance. All right? In other words, it's a very psychological book. She uses psychological language. She uses the metaphors of it. She uses techniques that are prevalent in therapy and psychoanalysis. Things like the journal, right? That emergency journal that she kind of whips out, which still, even though I want to have that happen for me, it still seems very artificial. And maybe it's because she's a writer and I'm not. That medium wouldn't work for me. But that emergency journal that she has, that in her deepest, darkest moments, she whips that thing out and a voice comes through in the writing. I think another very interesting kind of psychological prop is when she's talking about the personification of her emotions. So when she's in Italy and loneliness and depression, she kind of characterizes them as the mafia goons, who are following her around and who are going to decide for themselves whether or not they come up, And and that's a very kind of pop psychology kind of idea that we, can externalize these, we can kind of give them a character. And I don't mean pop in terms of, that's not a negative, I don't mean that in a negative way, but I'm just saying it's a very contemporary kind of way of doing that. So I find that she has a strong belief in the internal process. All right? Very strong belief. I am very interested in her struggle over her decision whether or not to take antidepressants. All right, now, she's very good about telling us about her family background and how this kind of influences her. And, Elizabeth, you should be able to pull yourself up by the bootstraps and work through this. And, that's the way family's done it and all that. And yes, I think that's true. But, I also expect perhaps a little bit more reflection on that for her and what her process was. She's excellent about admitting the issues that are up for her, obviously. I mean, you can't read this book and not fall in love with, oh yeah, I've done that, I've thought that. This is one of those kinds of books that you can instantly relate to no matter where you are on the map. All right? And I think that's one of the most endearing qualities. Excuse me. But I do find it interesting that she, there are a lot of contradictions, I think, for her personally that she doesn't examine. Like, for instance, I find it fascinating that she doesn't want to take antidepressants, but she's more than happy to take whatever the traditional healers give her, okay, without even knowing what's in them. She's like gobbling it down, she's drinking it down, not a question, all right? But what's the problem then? What's the problem with Western medicine? Why are you so suspicious of that, but yet you give carte blanche to traditional healers? Okay, because, let's face it, a lot of our pharmaceutical goods are based on older traditions of herbal medicine. All right. So anyway, it just was a contradiction that she never got into. She didn't kind of work on. Now, one of the questions that I have regarding this book is, to the extent of asking the question, was her year-long journey a selfish act? All right. And what I find interesting was, I had thought this. I thought, geez, part of this is a little kind of narcissistic quality to it. It's all about me. And the book it's all about me. It's her problems, it's her issues, it's, you don't get any sense of the larger world around her. And I'm not saying that's inappropriate all the time, but there were lots of questions in my mind when I was reading this saying, well, what about the people around you? What about some sense of an external reality? And you don't get that from the book. So I thought that question, and then I saw it come up on her website under frequently asked questions. And that people wrote in and said, was this a selfish thing that you did? And her response, I found this very interesting, was that it would serve no, she says it was not a selfish act for the following reasons. That it would serve no one to have her life in misery, and that the West, and she's turning back on the questioner, the West is obsessed with productivity and responsibility. All right, now, I have some problems with some of that, all right, particularly because, again, there's lack of a context for much of what she's telling us. It's a memoir, you know, but there's a lack of context for some of the kind of the things that are happening around her. For example, it's only when she gets to Bali do we begin to get any sense of a larger reality to her. And my guess is that she's telling us more about Bali, because if we went out on the street and said to people on the corner, excuse me, do you know where Bali is? You know, that 9 out of 10 people in the town of Colonie would have no idea where Bali is. So she has to give us a little more idea. But people have cultural stereotypes based on what Italy is, where Italy is, and kind of what that means, and where India is. All right. But it's that lack of an external sense of what's happening and other cultures that concern me. The other interesting kind of thing that she says is that this was not a selfish act because we leak our disposition on everyone around us. Therefore, we have a responsibility to clean it up so we don't infect other people. Okay, I buy that. I'm in a good mood. A lot of people are in a good mood. I'm in a bad mood. A lot of you are in a bad mood. Okay? I do understand that mirroring sense of reality, that we do, in a sense, have a tendency to mirror something that's going on inside of us. But, again, I don't necessarily want to say I buy that 100% of the time. You know, that there really are some, in my estimation of what she's going through, there really are some externals that are going to impinge on us. I cannot go, here we go, I'll get political for a second. I cannot go to Guantanamo Bay and be, you know, a little Miss Mary Sunshine. All right. That is a reality, that is a force that is going to, that supersedes, in a sense, what I'm hoping to have mirrored. All right. Just like we can't ignore things like racism and sexism or homophobia in our society. All right. So, you know, I just want to say there are some really nice mirrors out there, and then there are plenty of not so nice mirrors. But I think there's a collective sense that needs to be dealt with. That this kind of, I'm going to be happy, therefore everybody around me is going to be happy. I'm not so sure I buy that all the time. The second thing that another thing that I find interesting is this universalism that you find. It's almost as if, without saying it, she never says, we all need to go to India to find God. Okay? People are reading this book thinking, I want to go to this ashram, you know? I mean, you know, everybody's doing that. I'm doing that, you know? I want to find the pizzeria in, you know, Naples, okay? And so, in a sense, what's interesting to me, she says, oh, this is not a universal path, but yet she presents it in such an endearing way that how could you resist it? You know, how could you resist feeling, I need to do this? You know, my marriage is in crisis, therefore I need to go. All right. And again, some of that's good, because I think you can learn from, you know, kind of vicarious learning. But some of it is also, can be an escape too. And I think we need to kind of be honest about that. So I'm not sure if there's a bit of running away here. I think that's a good question to kind of ask. You know, is there something of running away? I do think there are some universal kind of underpinnings that are very American that she does not address that underlie this book. First, belief, and these can be good beliefs. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not just picking out the bad kind of cultural underpinnings. Some of these are very positive, but they're still uniquely American. All people are created equal, which That's not a universal worldview. Okay? That is, and we don't practice it, but I mean, we claim to believe it. All right? But that is not universal. All right? The whole nature of thinking about the idea, and certainly in India, of the idea of caste is based on an inequality. All right? It's based on an inequality. Secondly, that all people are the same everywhere. That's what she wants us to believe. Now, why do I say that? Anybody remember the story about her friend who's the psychiatrist who has to deal with the Cambodian women? Now, all right, there's this little piece in there, and I find this really fascinating, that this friend of hers who's a psychiatrist who's introducing these, or interviewing and helping, counseling these Cambodian women who are coming up, are saying, she said, I expected them to tell me stories about how horrific it was getting here and blah, 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 all of the challenges, everything. And what did they want to talk to me about? My boyfriend, the guy I met in the camp, all of these things. In other words, she wants to, kind of in a Walt Disney kind of way, she wants to make us all the same. All right, I expect to hear Elton John singing in the background, This is the circle of life. We're all the same. We're all one big happy family here. All right? That's not a worldview outside of this country, I don't think. All right? So I think we need to think about that. I think she also believes that all people share the same basic emotions and the same basic notions of life. She's very good at kind of telling us all religious ritual is based on blah, blah, blah. Okay? Or she'll say, all search for God. Well, those are really big statements. Really big statements. And the other thing that I found interesting is I think she really believes that all people are truly saddened by the same events. And I don't necessarily know that that's true. Even up unto someone's death, not all cultures treat that as a loss. All right? Not all cultures treat that as a loss. So I think those are kind of some of her, universal beliefs that she doesn't really come out and tell us, but is evident in terms of what she is saying. All right, now, what did I like? I already told you I like the fact that the search for God and the search for this greater sense of herself are inexorably intertwined. I love the fact that she's warm and fuzzy. Okay, this is a warm and fuzzy book. I just wanted to reread it again because it just made me feel good. It's easy to identify with her and to identify with her internal state of mind. Now, I want to say this. It's easy for me to identify with her. Well, we have a lot in common, her and I. We come from middle-class families. She's a product of, education and higher education, so am I. Right? So we've got a lot, so I don't know how easy it is to identify with her, given a very diverse perspective or viewpoint. Maybe it is. I love the fact that her journey here leads her from brokenness to wholeness. Or as I would say it, at least as whole as you can be at the age of 35. All right? And there's good things about being 35, right? We always talk about, Joseph Campbell used to say, whenever he wants to talk about resurrection of the body, he says, he was talking about this when he was in his 70s, he said, if my body's going to be resurrected, he said, I hope it's my body when I was 35, okay? And not the one that I got at 70. I love the fact that the pain presented is real. It is visceral. It really comes to, she has a remarkable ability to describe the pain that she experiences. And I think she also touches, and I like this a lot, on the need for new rituals. Okay, now she gets very eclectic in her spirituality and her religious traditions that she kind of dabbles in. But she does talk about that, generally speaking, there is this need for new rituals to emerge. And as a religious studies professor, I absolutely agree. Okay, that many of the rituals that we have had in the past are not speaking to people today, and therefore they need to emerge, kind of new forms. Now, I'm happy that she mentions the history of the people of Bali because, again, reading that section on Bali, if she had left those 2 paragraphs out on how murderously bloody Bali's history is, I would be like, my God, this is the Garden of Eden, let's all move there, right? It just sounds, it's absolutely too good to be true. And I find it interesting that while she does mention the question of caste in terms of Bali, she does not mention that in terms of her experience in India, or rarely does. And then secondly, she never mentions the idea of class, because caste and class are 2 very different things, particularly in the India of 2007, right, where you have enormous economic growth. All right, what I don't like, and then I can have maybe 4 more minutes? Okay. Well, these people got to get back to doing their thing. But what I don't like, my major problem with what she does here is she makes us go to Italy for food, India for prayer, and Bali for sex. Okay? I mean, relationships, others, whatever. That's what it ends up. All right? It's fascinating to me, and again, this is why I say she's really using cultural stereotypes to a certain extent, because she could as easily find spirituality in Italy, or food in India. God knows there's some, Indian food is yummy, right? So there's no problem finding, delicious stuff there. And this notion of kind of finding these traditional or quasi-traditional healers in Bali, and then kind of finding, some additional spices in Bali, all right? But, these are all based on stereotypes, okay? And I think, in a sense, they are tropes. They are not, the notion of India as a spiritual haven, okay, I think does not do justice. We think about the spiritual East, and she kind of does this for us. The spiritual East. I mean, this started way back in probably around 1896 when Swami Vivekananda was the first Hindu to speak at the Parliament of World Religions in Chicago. And really, since that time, all the Victorians got into it. A lot of the Victorians got into kind of this idea of the spiritual East. We had to go to India to find our true spirituality. And then, of course, that got revisited in the 60s when you had many young people going to India to find God. So she kind of uses these stereotypes, but I want you to understand that you can if you want to find the heart of economics, you can go to India too. So just to think that, my God, India is just this big country of praying people, and they're so holy. All right, forget it. Forget it. I mean, that's just a stereotype that's kind of been built up. It's a trope, and it's not to say that there aren't wonderful people in India. Of course there are. But the idea is just to paint it in one light as being a place of, strictly spirituality, without neglecting, at the same time neglecting to look at the other facets of that culture, does not give one an accurate kind of appraisal. And she doesn't. I mean, she doesn't. So in Italy, she's got to go find her pleasure through food. Well, again, we could do that almost anywhere. All right, but because it's such an American cultural icon that Italy's got great food, it's like Italy's a big restaurant, all right, and India's a big church, okay, and Bali, we won't talk about what Bali is big, okay, but you understand what I'm saying? I mean, I loved it, but I just wanted to say that this is somehow based. I'm not sure that I really like the fact that she's so, without question, accepts these cultural stereotypes. All right. And but then again, I'm I'm kind of reading this through the lens of, academically what I would look at. All right, so the other thing that concerns me, and we touched on this briefly, is this idea of that all is me. This kind of narcissistic look that she has, that she's so intent on examining her and processing herself constantly throughout this. On the one hand, it's really charming and wonderful, but on the other hand, I think Elizabeth, come up for air. There's something about not having to be in your process the entire time that I found just made me a little nervous. And I think, the lack of, it's not this kind of a book, but the lack of mentioning any sense of social justice in any of these places makes me a little nervous. And maybe she did. Maybe they got edited out. I don't know. The other thing that I didn't like is I'm not so sure she really addresses the root of her pain. The ostensible reason is she says, I didn't want to have children. That's kind of the thing, the tip-off to why her marriage broke up. Now, she does admit that there's a lot of stuff underneath that, but I'm not so sure that I really end up feeling that the root, whatever the root is of her pain, is somehow resolved. The circumstances seem to be resolved. She's in touch with God. She's in touch with herself. She can handle, difficult situations. But I'm not so sure that I saw, and maybe it was there and I didn't see it, this sense of resolution of the root of this pain. Maybe it hasn't been. I don't know. And I don't really agree with her reasoning for ritual. She seems to neglect that rituals can be transformational. In particular, this comes out when she's working with the healer, the gentleman in Bali, and she says, "Oh, he's got to do the tooth filing down ceremonies and the this ceremonies and the that ceremonies," and in a sense, she psychologizes it to a certain extent, which is a very Western kind of approach, I think. But she doesn't necessarily kind of look at the transformative power of those ritual experiences for the people. But again, it's so much about her. It's hard. We don't get her viewpoint on a whole lot of other people. And I find that disturbing because she says she spent so much time with these people. That I would have thought that would have been part of her reflection. So, and then I think the other thing that is interesting to me is that little story of Wayan in the end of the book, where she kind of is getting duped. For those of you who haven't read it, there's a story in which she's done a remarkable, miraculous thing for this woman who is a healer and her daughter. Come to find out that you do a good thing sometimes, and somebody wants a little more and a little more and a little more, and she's getting strung along. Well, what I find so fascinating about it is that it doesn't fit in terms of the rest of the book. She comes to realize, I'm getting duped. If I don't do something about it, and she never, in my mind anyway, offers a reflection on that experience. The reflection on that experience comes through the boyfriend, Philippe, who's the one who's saying, he kind of gives the insight that's needed, but she doesn't really get reflective about that. And I would have loved to seen her think reflectively about that experience in relationship to her own pain. Because again, she doesn't look at this, he's the one who interjects the worldview. Look, you're the white person. You're the person from America. This is a traditional person, who's got no chance of ever having something like this happen again. So what dynamics does that set up? It almost impresses me as a little bit of a naivete on her part, until she kind of catches this. But it just doesn't seem to fit. And really, it was interesting because in my mind, that was the first kind of negative thing that we saw happen in the book from the time that she left the U.S. It was all roses and candy until the woman tried to dupe her. All right? And yes, it was hard to meditate. Okay, it's hard to meditate. I just don't consider that to be a negative kind of thing. That's like it's hard to exercise, it's right? It's a different kind of negative. And I kind of want to end up with just saying, looking towards the future. Again, I'll end kind of with the questions that I began with. What does this type of book look like when you are out of your 30s and into your 40s and 50s and 60s? And what is her reflection going to be on these experiences when there has been more time separating her life from her travels? Okay, so I think that, that is... And the other thing that I have to ask about this is the question of gender. Why is this book so charming when it's about a woman's journey? Would it be nearly as charming about a man's journey? Probably not. My sense of this is people are, and it's interesting because on her frequently asked questions page, people wrote in asking, women would write in saying, is it safe for me to travel? There were questions about and I don't know, I'm just saying, this is, it's a good question for discussion. Would this really be as interesting if it was a man's journey as compared to a woman's? I don't know, maybe not. My kind of sense of it would be that it probably wouldn't be. At least it wouldn't be considered by the larger culture as being as... And maybe that's just because men run off and do, stupid things all the time. You know what I mean? It's, it's not that unusual for a man to leave his marriage and run away and, go eat and drink and even pray and then sleep with somebody and, I don't know. I'm just saying, but that's a cultural stereotype as well. But I'm just saying, maybe it wouldn't be as interesting. I don't know. But I think they're good questions. In the end, I really enjoyed the book. I would highly recommend it to people for good summer reading. It's a good reading, a bedtime reading. I hope you have kind of gotten my sense of the book and maybe taken away some questions, about the thing. And I'm going to leave it there. And thank you very much for having me. Good. Questions?
When she planned this trip, what did she expect to get from those 3 different places?
Yeah.
She doesn't quite, she knows she has to see this man in Bali.
Yes.
Indian, why? Well, that one area for meditation. And Italy, did she say she didn't do anything in Italy that the average American wants in Italy.
That's right.
Yeah, right. She didn't go to a museum.
That's right.
She didn't go anywhere to see anything.
Italian.
And they-
Yeah, that's what it was.
I find
Language.
even the whole event, like the palm reader, in Bali. I don't know if I'm going to go halfway across the world because a palm reader says, you got to come back and see me. I find that to be a little Indiana Jones-ish, for me. But you're right. She doesn't adequately explain her choices and why.
And they were planned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even though Valley said she couldn't stay, she did stay.
Yeah. But I do love the fact that when she goes back to him, he says, I don't remember you. Who are you? I never saw you before. I thought that was great. She's a master at kind of building in humility.
Yeah.
She never lets herself get too grandiose. And I think that's her saving grace. Because really, if she got pompous on us, I think we'd all probably turn it off.
Yeah.
But she's always deflating her own balloon, which is charming.
Do you believe that at the end, and I don't want to give the end away, but do you think she'll stay with that ending, living in 3 different countries?
It's interesting because that's the number one question that people ask if she's still in a relationship and how that's going.
We want the next one.
Yeah, that's the thing. You want the kind of the next journey. I don't know. In my 30s, that would have been okay.
Yeah.
To have that kind of relationship. I'm not so sure that I want that kind of relationship now. You know what I'm saying? And I don't, and Mr. Brazilian kind of jet setter, he's obviously in a different place, so I don't know. But, at some points in your life, that could be a pretty fulfilling thing. Perhaps not at others. Questions? Yes, sir.
What was her final view of God?
I'm sorry?
What was her final view of God?
I think she takes a very universal, and I want to say, she wants to take a very transcendent view of God in many ways. She struggles with this transcendent God who is kind of dealing with the big picture, but also gives her this very personal feel. You know, the God who writes to her in the notebook. So I think she bounces back and forth between those two ideas. That she wants this to be a universal thing, because God's for everybody, and God takes care of everybody, and we're all on this journey together, but yet she also wants a God who's very immediate to her. You know, that I can whip out the notebook and start writing to. All right, so I think she still kind of struggles with that. But it's a very blissful ending. I mean, you know, I'd be happy too. You know, I'm on this island, and it's this other person, and, you know, I mean, hey, what's wrong with that picture? Nothing. God's good too. You know, when I'm in those spaces, God's good. You know, when I'm laying on the bathroom floor, God's not so good. So, that's the other.
I think we're all on a journey of discovery, all of us. And I know that I'm going to be personal, there were things that I have gone back in time and found that I liked about myself, and some things were questionable. But now that I'm older than the ages you've stated, I've discovered that I'm a stranger to myself. I find that I don't think I'll ever really know who I am. And it gives me pleasure, because I can sit back in some objective way, and when things happen, they don't torment me like they used to. And then I'm not as flattered by myself as I am. So this is, and it's the same thing with my approach to the eternal. I was always seeking and searching, and now I've discovered that it's just beyond me. It's a mysterious world, it's a frightening world, but it's a remarkable world. And I don't think that I just know that it's beyond human understanding, and it gives me comfort now. I'm ready to leave. I won't accept a return visit.
Not even if you come back to Bali?
So I'm sure that I would enjoy this book, because I would relate to her.
Yeah.
And I would say to her, oh, time is going to show you things that you don't anticipate now. And you're not all wise. In fact, we're all good. We all have violence within us, just like the world. We're all open-minded and bigoted. And I've discovered that I live it alone. I'm a stranger to myself. And that's the way it's going to end.
That's neat. That's a wonderful way. I like that.
Well, any more questions, or? Oh, okay.
I did not read the book, but I was curious. She found God in India. On my visit there, that would be the last place.
Tell us why. Tell us why.
The extreme poverty.
Yes.
The people sleeping in the gutters, and the people driving up in limousines, stepping over them to go into these fancy hotels, dressed in their embroidered saris. It was just too much. You say to yourself, I did. How could God permit this? Maybe she found her personal God, but it's different for other people.
I agree with you. You know, India is a hard country. It's a hard country for Westerners to visit, because it is so different. And, you know, everything from the economics to the cultural components to whatever. And remember, India is not one solid entity. I mean, India is a subcontinent. And, you know, it's got 1 billion people there. All right? So, you know, there are enormous differences even within the country, you know, to be fair about the diversity that's present. But absolutely, it's, you know, yeah. So you're right. I think they're very good questions. And she doesn't visit any of those troubles. And that's what bothers me. Even if she had put in a few of them, I would be happy. But she doesn't mention any of them.
Well, this was New Delhi I was speaking about.
Yeah,
It's not
well,
a
she flies into
same
Mumbai.
place.
She flies into Mumbai, which is a major center. So, you know.
All right, well, John, thanks a lot. This has been great. Thank you.